Well, my goodness, didn't I go on way longer than I expected. There's no one here to tell me I'm rambling, so I apologize. Let's put a bow on this story, shall we? When we last spoke, we had Thomas Edison on one side proposing that direct current was the best. On the other side, we had Westinghouse's group, including the inventor Nikola Tesla, supporting alternating current. And we left off with a former Edison employee, Harold Brown. Now, it is important to note, he's a former employee. He is not currently under the employ of Thomas Edison. Everything he does, it's not Edison's fault. Edison didn't stop it, Edison helped with a little bit of publicity, but he was really not so much behind all this. If you recall, he was horrified by a few deaths that happened with alternating current. Again, same deaths could have happened with direct current, but we won't get into that just yet. That's a different story entirely. What we are going to talk about are his shows. Now, in order to prove that alternating current was dangerous and deadly, he used a direct current source to shock cats. Now, just shock them. Not kill them, shock them. He would shock the cats publicly and say, this is direct current source. Obviously, the cats were reacting to it because it's electricity, but they weren't dying. And then he would hook them up to the alternating current source, and he would electrocute them, which means not shock, but kill the cats. Now, that's kind of horrific. You and I can't imagine that. There are protection agencies around that stop things like that nowadays. And actually, there were back then. They just didn't have a whole lot of power, especially since he was rounding up strays. Now, cats, they weren't enough. And as you may remember from Luigi Galvani, when you have one animal responding to electricity and it's not enough, you gotta up your game. So he went from cats to dogs, electrocuting dogs with alternating current to prove their danger. And this, of course, was horrifying. It was shocking, no pun intended, and it did draw crowds, but at the same time caused panic in crowds. But again, alternating current was a more viable, cheaper, and more efficient option for electrical current generation, so his efforts as an activist were not enough. So Harold had to move on to something different, and that's where we add Topsy into our story. Now, Topsy was an elephant not born in captivity, actually born in the wild, brought to the United States, and she became a performing circus elephant, traveling circus. Now, for the majority of her career, for at least the beginning part of her career, she had one trainer, and the trainer developed a strong bond with Topsy, and Topsy learned to do many tricks. But the life of a circus elephant is not a great one. And the life of a traveling circus elephant is probably even worse. So Topsy had a whole lot of anxiety. She became known as a very cranky performing elephant. But through the efforts of her trainer, she was kept under control, and she would perform. The older she got, though, the more anxious she became around larger and larger crowds. So much so that large crowds around her, would bother her, and occasionally she would go on a bit of a rampage. When the crowds got too loud, Topsy would get nervous and try and run. And unfortunately, she'd run towards people. Now, she didn't kill anybody, at least not at that point. But she was becoming a problem. So the circus was thinking of selling her to a different outfit. At roughly the same time, Topsy's trainer retired. Replacing him was a trainer that was much more abusive, didn't have the same nurturing attitude towards animal training, and Topsy's nervous condition became worse. So bad that she was eventually sold by the traveling circus and retired to a place called Lunar Park. Now, at Lunar Park, the trainer followed the elephant, basically package deal. And at Lunar Park, she continued to perform in a smaller venue, and it was right actually off Coney Island in New York City. But this cranky elephant ended up having a worse reputation there because her anxiety got worse. She would occasionally get loose, run at or through the crowds, not really hurting anybody. But it was enough to draw the wrong kind of spectators, people that want to see a show go wrong. And this one particular time, a particularly drunk spectator got into the circus tent, got all the way up to Topsy, and made a very bad mistake. He threw sand in her eyes. And then he tried to burn her with a cigar, right on her trunk. Topsy then picked up that person, threw the person on the ground, and trampled him. And now Topsy was a man killer. And the circus couldn't afford that. The city wouldn't allow it. So Topsy had to be dealt with. And as you may have guessed it, that's where Harold re-enters our story. Now, different tales tell different things. We do know from public record that at one point the park decided they were going to hang Topsy using a very strong rope being pulled by a steam engine. Fortunately, there were protected groups that came out and said that's just not okay. You can't euthanize an animal in that manner. That's horrific. But wanting to make a buck, they still wanted to make a show out of it. So what happened is Harold approached the circus and they agreed. One morning, December of 1902, Topsy was fed a lot of carrots laced with cyanide. Now, Topsy was a tank. This was not enough to kill Topsy. But after being doped with these laced carrots, Topsy was let out, and in front of a crowd, Topsy was electrocuted by 60,000 volts of alternating current, which was more than enough to kill Topsy. And that is essentially where that part of the story ends. No more animal executions were carried out by Harold, but his ideas didn't end up dying with Topsy. The story will pick up later with Harold and a dentist from Buffalo, New York, that worked together to invent something that became known as Old Sparky, which actually resided not too far from our school, right down Route 20 in Auburn, New York. They invented the very first electric chair, designed after the dentist's chair itself. Weird. I don't understand why he made that connection. It's like, you know what? This chair I usually do oral surgery on, this would be really good for delivering an electrical current to kill people. But that is where the story goes, and I think I've gone on long enough for right now. We will talk more and take a few more notes. Please check out the rest of the assignment, and have a great weekend.